How's it going? I'm Graham Doran for the Unnamed Bracketology podcast, along with my co-host, Kerry Miller. Ready to get into it? Let's just go ahead and get started with the two teams that we want to start off with. The two teams that Kerry, for some reason, cannot seed correctly
Okay.
at the top of the bracket.
Okay.
Number one, the Memphis Tigers.
They're not a one seed. Don't say number one Memphis Tigers like I'm crazy, but go ahead.
I have Memphis hanging out at the top of my four line, so the 13th overall seed, and I can tell you exactly why I have them there. Memphis, great resume metrics. Very impressive resume metrics. In fact, the 8th best resume metrics in the country.
Yep.
An average of 8 between 9 and 7. Perfectly fine. In fact, really, really high end. Their efficiency isn't very good, but more importantly to me, they're just 1 and 2 against quadrant 1. I don't care how good the resume metrics are, you have to take a hit for not getting wins against the top half of the bracket.
Yeah, I generally agree. And not only are they 1 and 2 against Quad 1, I got a whole list of teams right here. And Quad 1A, I just have an X for Memphis. No games yet. So even I hate that I have them on the 2 line. I actually moved them up 1 spot to number 7 overall after Wisconsin's loss. And that bothers me a lot. I just don't see who else should be ahead of them because, Tennessee is right there. They've got warts. They're 1 and 4 against Quad 1A, 2 and 4 against Quad 1. Same record, just more opportunities, right? 33% wins against Quad 1. Obviously, with Wisconsin losing, I dropped them. Baylor, not as good metrically as Memphis is. So, again, I don't feel like they're a 2 seed, but I feel like I have to seed them there because their resume is so strong. And it is so strong because they're 6-0 against Quad 2, which is why it feels weird. Those aren't usually the games we talk about when we're looking at 1 seeds and 2 seeds, but for them to be so strong in the resume metrics, even though they are 40th in the net and 45th in the BPI and KenPom average, I just have a hard time putting anybody else above them.
Where do you have Wisconsin?
9 overall, so my top 3 seed.
Okay.
And they're 4 and 3 against Quad 1, and that's why I originally had them ahead of Memphis on Sunday or Monday, whenever it was. But just for Wisconsin to pick up that bad loss to Penn State, which Memphis is 1 and 2 against Quad 1, but they're perfect outside of Quad 1, which is part of it as well.
So you have Memphis above Tennessee
Yes.
at 7.
I don't like it, but that's where I have them.
Tennessee has exceptional efficiency,
Yeah.
but they also have a really, really good win at Wisconsin in a true road victory.
Yep.
I'm not seeing it. I think if you have the efficiency that Tennessee has, and you've also scored a major, major victory at the top of the bracket, I like Tennessee over Memphis. I can understand from the resume metric perspective why you have Memphis there. They've been great down the field. Exceptionally in Quadrant 2, they've been awesome in Quadrant 2.
Yeah, 6-0 against Quad 2, 8 wins outside of that, which, Quad 3, Quad 4, who cares unless you lose them, right? When we're talking 1s and 2s, but yeah,
If you were in that committee room, you would choose Memphis over Tennessee if we put them up right next to each other.
I think resume-wise, yeah, just the overall quality of their wins, even though they don't have that top-tier win, the lack of anything even remotely bad in the losses, I think, puts them ahead for me for now. And I don't think they will end the year there because they're not going to get those opportunities outside of games against Florida Atlantic. Like, Tennessee is going to pick up, even if Tennessee doesn't win the SEC, they're going to pick up way more Quad 1 wins the rest of the way than Memphis will. They'll probably slide ahead of them eventually. And I think that's part of it overall for me. Like, I have Grand Canyon as a 7 seed right now. I have Princeton at an 8 or a 9. We're going to get to Dayton in a minute. I have them solidly on the 3 line. And I think that's kind of the glass ceiling for all of those teams. Even if they were to win out, like maybe if Dayton wins out, they could get into the conversation for 1 seed. I don't think they'll get all the way there. But even that would only be them moving up like 5 spots for winning every remaining game. So it's just kind of like they're there until these other teams improve their resume enough to get ahead of them. And these other teams will have all of the opportunity to do just that.
Okay, so I imagine your Dayton logic is going to track pretty similarly. Dayton has a 4.5 resume metric average. Really, really, really great resume metrics. I can see why somebody would want to have Dayton towards the top half of the bracket. I have them at my 16th overall seed, my last 4 seed, so I agree they should be pretty high up there. What do you see about Dayton that puts them? Well, where exactly do you have Dayton?
I have Dayton 11 overall, so they're on the 3 line. They have one really good win, which is slipping my mind who that's even against, but I wrote down they're 1-1 against Quad 1A, and they have no losses outside of Quad 1. I do think Dayton is the better team. I think certainly the net and the other predictive metrics back that up. I mean, I would take Deron Holmes over anything Memphis has to offer. I think they're a much better defensive team as well, and they're better about not playing down to their level of competition like Memphis is. But I think, resume wise, like you said, 4.5 in the resume metrics, 19th in the net, so they are way ahead of Memphis in that regard. But again, just nothing even close to a bad loss, which is, I think, big at this time of year.
Yeah, I mean, I do see the strength with Dayton's resume. They've got that, neutral court victory over Cincinnati, but that was in Cincinnati, just wasn't on Cincinnati's home floor. They've got a neutral court win over St. John's. They won a true road game at SMU, who maybe not a tournament team, but that's a pretty solid resume win.
That's like a road win over Xavier, basically.
Yeah, I mean, they have a winning record against Quad 1. Yeah. That has to be for something. They're also 32nd in efficiency. And of all of those teams that I mentioned, what's similar to Memphis? What's that one win that really makes you say, okay, that team is elite?
Yeah.
And I guess for me, those top 3 seeds, they're the elite teams. Yeah. The teams that have proven they're not just really good on a resume, they're just really, really good. And I guess for me, that's kind of almost where I'm drawing that line. Memphis I had at like 12th overall for a really long time. Eventually, they just kind of got passed up by another team performing well, who was Duke, eventually moving into that 3 line, and Marquette kind of bouncing back a little bit from some of their struggles. Yep. But I just really, it's almost like an invisible ceiling for me. If you want to be a top 3 seed, you have to be a national championship contender. And I just don't know that I see Memphis or Dayton as national championship contenders.
I definitely don't see Memphis. I could see Dayton messing around making the Final Four. I don't know if they're necessarily a title team, but yeah, it's just resume-wise, that's where I'm at on those 2 teams. I mean, this is why we discussed it. I have both of them ahead of both Duke and Kentucky. You have both of them behind both Duke and Kentucky. That's why it kind of stand out to me. But I think we discussed it on Sunday that at the time of my top, 26 teams, I think it was, Duke and Kentucky only had 3 wins against the top 2 quadrants, which Memphis has, I think, 7. Dayton has 6. So even though they don't have that marquee win, they didn't beat North Carolina on a neutral floor like Kentucky did. They didn't beat Baylor on a neutral floor at Madison Square Garden like Duke did, but just the overall strength of their nothing wrong with it, no bad losses resume just gets them there for me for right now.
Kind of keeping the topic on some teams that are outside of the Power 6 conferences. I think this one is a little bit different. I think the AAC, Memphis, really great league. The A10, really great league. When we put it in the grand scheme of things, right? Those are not going to be your Power 6, but they are just in that segment of conferences below that. Who's a true mid-major that you think you can see in the tournament as an at-large, not just through an automatic bid?
Yeah, so we've got, the Power 6, and then it's Mountain West, A10, AAC, Missouri Valley, West Coast, kind of, those usual multi-bid leagues. We're talking like the other 21 leagues. And for me, it's got to be Grand Canyon. They've got that home win over San Diego State. They won at Liberty. They had a good win really early in the year, too. I forget who that was. Maybe VCU. Maybe I'm confusing them with somebody else. But they only have 1 loss. And it was, I believe, a true road game against South Carolina, which is a pretty solid team. Better than we thought they were going to be, for sure. I have South Carolina around like the 7 seed line right now. So that's not a bad loss by any means. They got to avoid picking up terrible losses in the WAC, though. But if they're able to, run the table or maybe lose 1 game to, Sam Houston or something. I can't even think who the second best team is in the WAC this year. Maybe Utah Valley. If they lose 1 game and then lose in the WAC championship, I definitely think Grand Canyon has a shot at getting in.
Yeah, I think I guess I would say I'm so high on Grand Canyon that I think they can take one loss in the regular season and a conference tournament loss
Yeah.
and still probably get in. It might depend on what else goes on around them, but like you mentioned, some good wins. San Diego State definitely stands out, but Liberty was a quality win as well. Just a very good Quad One record.
Yeah.
Which it's and actually they're going to avoid other games in Quad One, which as odd as it sounds, could really be to their advantage because that Quad One record is going to stay a winning record
Yeah.
at the end of the year. And I think if you're a committee member and you're looking at the end of the year, they're like, yeah, they dropped a couple games, but look how they did against Quad One when they played the best teams on their schedule. I think that definitely is to their advantage. That Q1 record really can't get any
Yep.
harm to it at this point. The other team that I have on my radar is Princeton. I
Sure.
think Grand Canyon is a step above them.
I agree.
Their wins are just better. For me, that's the big difference. Princeton has great resume metrics as well. They've been very solid, and the Ivy League, I think, is a better league than the WAC.
Yeah.
You've got some more quality opponents, but none of those wins are going to be the wins that really grab your attention. So I think
Yep.
Princeton might need to be a little bit cleaner than Grand Canyon. While I think Grand Canyon can probably drop one in conference play, I don't think Princeton can. I think Princeton will have to go unbeaten into the 4-team Ivy League tournament and hope that's enough.
Yeah, so Princeton lost to St. Joseph's. That's certainly worse than Grand Canyon's loss to South Carolina, and they don't have that San Diego State win. So I agree, they're already a good step below Grand Canyon, and like you said, Ivy League. Like they're some decent wins, but nothing that's going to move the needle unless it's a loss. Like even a win at Yale is, I still think, Quad 2 and pretty solidly Quad 2. Like they're not going to be able to really enhance their resume, so they got to avoid losses. But if they were to just lose to Yale in the Ivy League championship game, well, that is Sunday, like an hour before the bracket comes out. So who knows if that'll factor in or not? But I think they would have a very strong case for an at-large bid for sure.
I think there's two other teams that are not as high on my radar right now, but I think have a potential there. James Madison has that win at Michigan State. Obviously, James Madison lost recently, so there's some question about whether the resume is going to be good enough or not. I think it's a close call, depending on how they go from here. But there's another team that I actually haven't ruled out completely, and not McNeese State, but that's a good one. Their resume metrics aren't close. Their performance metrics aren't close. But I think if they can get through to the Sun Belt title game without a loss, and I've already mentioned James Madison.
James Madison. Appalachian State?
I think Appalachian State
Really?
is not done. I think Appalachian State
they
is
did beat
on
Auburn,
the radar.
right?
They did beat Auburn.
That's one
and
hell
they're
of a
2-0
net win.
against
That's one hell of a
Quadrant
net
1.
win.
If you're 2-0 against Quadrant 1 and you've got a win over Auburn, if they can keep building and building and building, and you'd assume, performance metrics rise a little bit, but those resume metrics, if they can get all the way there, could be pretty high. And then if you're the committee, you're like, well, they're in range, and they've got to win over Auburn.
Yep.
That could be the thing that goes ahead and vaults them into the tournament. So I think Appalachian State's a long shot, but I am not ruling them out. I think when you have a win over Auburn, depending on how the Tigers finish the season, that could really catch the attention of the committee.
They already won their game at JMU. So we're saying Appalachian State maybe runs the table so they would get a sweep of James Madison on top of that and then loses to James Madison in the Sun Belt title. Maybe. I could see that. That's not crazy. It's less crazy than me saying McNeese will get in with nothing but Quad 4 games the rest of the way. Even if they were to lose only in the conference championship, like that's going to be really tough, even though they have. That's what I was thinking of before, that beat VCU. McNeese won at VCU, won at Michigan. Neither of those teams is remotely close to the field right now, but those are solid wins. But I don't think there's any case if they lose a single game in the Southland Conference. That whole league is terrible beyond McNeese.
So one team that we already talked about briefly in relation to Appalachian State, the Auburn Tigers, a team that has not really faced top-level competition.
They don't have an X in Quad 1A, but they are 0-1. And 0-1 against Quad 1 altogether. That's rough.
I mean, how does a Power 6 conference team have one game against Quadrant 1 at this point in the season? It's actually shocking
Yeah.
to only play one game against Quad 1 at this point. As you mentioned, they did not win that game.
Right.
So how are you feeling about the Tigers? How do you judge teams who haven't played that very top level competition?
Yeah, it's tough. So their resume, I have them 13th overall, which is below all of their metrics. They're 7th in the net, 12.5 in the resume metrics, and 5th in the predictives, BPI and KenPom. But as we said, 0-1 against Quad 1, 5-1. They have a Quad 2 loss, and then 10-0 against the whatever games. It is tough because all the metrics say, yeah, here they are. They deserve this. Show me the wins, which is what you've been saying with Memphis and Dayton. I'm saying it with Auburn.
Yeah, I have Auburn on the 3 line. Feel good about them there because they look so good, and they're also 5-1 against Quadrant 2. So feel good about the Tigers there, but I don't think they're 2 seed level, and I don't think they're going to get up to that 1 line, barring an absolutely dominant run through the SEC, because they just didn't do anything out of conference that catches your attention. Another similar team, Illinois, a team that has very good efficiency metrics, but also hasn't been very successful against Quad 1. How do you look at Illinois?
Yeah, Illinois, 16th in the net, 26th resume, 12.5 predictives. I have them as my bottom 4 seed right now. Felt like when they lost that home game to Maryland, they should have dropped even further than that, but they're still looking pretty solid. But again, no top half of Quad 1 wins. And then the whole, Terrence Shannon Jr. factor. They've actually looked pretty okay without him. Almost beat Purdue. Picked up a couple of decent wins. Beat Michigan State pretty handedly, actually. So I think if it weren't for that loss to Maryland, we would still have Illinois possibly like on that 2-3 bubble seed line. So, but that's a bad loss. That's a really bad loss. And aside from Kentucky's home loss to UNC Wilmington, nobody else, even remotely in the 4 seed conversation, has a Quad 3 or Quad 4 loss. So that really hurts them, comparing them to, your Marquettes and your Auburns of the world.
I haven't really looked at where other bracketologists have them, but just kind of anecdotally talking with some other bracketologists, I think they're probably higher on Illinois than I am. I actually have them as my last 5 seed,
Okay.
20th overall. I think they're closer to that resume metric than they are their efficiency metrics, just because I don't see it. What have they done against the top portion of their schedule that really impresses you? I mean, Florida Atlantic's not looking as good as they had for a while. And I think it gets kind of back to that factor of, do you really trust that this Illinois team is a national championship contender team?
Yeah.
And I'm not feeling that way about them. And I think when you don't feel that way, you maybe side a little bit more with those resume metrics that aren't quite as good. So I think they get some credit for having a couple good wins against Quadrant 1. I think they get credit for being an efficient team.
Yeah.
I just don't think they've done enough to get any higher. It's a very hollow resume to me, even if they have a strong overall record.
Yeah, I definitely think the reason for the gap, 26 resume, 12.5 predicted, that's, theoretically a 3 seed line gap. They looked pretty good in the losses to Marquette and Illinois, or excuse me, Marquette and Purdue, but they were still losses. They don't have that marquee wins. That's why they, efficiency-wise, looked like they could be a 3 seed. Metrics-wise, not really.
Let's move on to a question about those national championship contenders that we've been talking about.
Okay.
Change it up a little bit. Not necessarily bracketology related, but
Sure.
college basketball related. If you could choose the number of teams in the country that you would trust to win the national championship versus the entire field, what is the least amount of teams that could be? So basically what I'm trying to say is, would it be 3 teams that you would take versus the field?
Yeah.
Would it be 10 teams that you could take? What is the smallest that group could be? And then what are those teams that make up that group?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, as the year goes on, I get this question a lot, like on radio shows. Like, how many title contenders are there? And by February, I'm like, I don't know, 25? Like, anybody could. But right now, it does feel like 4 to me. I think it's Purdue and Connecticut for sure, the clear upper echelon right now, which is actually what the case was at the end of December 2022. I actually wrote a column on whether Purdue or UConn is better equipped to win it all. I concluded it was Connecticut, but I didn't pick them to win it all because I'm an idiot. Don't know why I didn't go back and read that. But Purdue and Connecticut for sure. North Carolina, I think for sure the way they've been defending lately. R.J. Davis is number 3 in my National Player of the Year rankings. Armando Bacot is great. The Harrison Ingram addition, he's been such a Andre Jackson type of player for him that he was for Connecticut last year. And then Kentucky would be my 4th, even though resume-wise I still see them as a low 4 seed. I think even I'm a little bit high in projecting that, but just like we talked about on Sunday, you just watch Kentucky, just feels like they can score 90 on anyone, and we know that. It's also been the case with Gonzaga for so many years recently, and they haven't won one, so that scares me. I wouldn't want to actually just specifically bet on Kentucky, but if you give me those 4, I'd feel pretty comfortable.
I think my list is 5 teams. Very similar. I think UConn is the number 1 team that I would list, assuming they're injury-free. If injuries are a problem, then maybe not. After UConn, it's UNC. Then I would throw Purdue in. They're just dominant.
Yeah.
I don't trust them, but they're dominant. I would put Arizona behind because they're so strong offensively. If they're on their game, if the Caleb Love experience of the hot and cold Caleb Love is on fire at the right time, Arizona could absolutely cut nets. And then I get that 5th team is the one you've already mentioned, Kentucky. I cannot quit Kentucky as a national championship contender. I would say the 2 teams that are right outside that pack to me are Houston and Kansas. I don't trust Kansas offensively. I think they've looked a lot better since Johnny Furphy entered the starting lineup 2 games ago. A lot better. And then the second team I would say is Houston. I think they're really good. They're number 1 in the efficiency metrics for a reason. But I don't trust a team that I don't trust to score.
Yep.
And if they are not scoring the ball, it's a long tournament for somebody to win 6 straight against tournament level competition. So I would go with those 5. Basically the same list as you have for the most part.
We did not even mention Duke between us, and I don't think we're wrong there. There's just something missing about them this year. I can't even put my finger on it, and I watch basically every one of their games. It just doesn't feel like they have it.
And you mentioned Memphis as a 2 seed. We didn't mention them. We also had discussed Tennessee and Wisconsin as being up toward the top of the bracket.
Tennessee,
Baylor,
I could see. Now that Dalton Knecht is all the way back and averaging like 34 points over his last 3 games, although they went 7-0 when he was like not right. He averaged under 10 points per game after rolling his ankle against North Carolina, and they're like 6-4. Oh, dog! They're like 6-4 when he is playing well. So, kind of a weird Ewing theory thing going on there, where they were better off without Dalton Knecht. But they would probably be my 5th team, even ahead of Arizona. I think Tennessee is really good.
We'll have to mark the dog bark at just nearing the 23-minute mark. And
the kid
here
mark.
comes the kid.
Can you tell me something?
We got a visit from a child.
What do you have to tell us?
Tom
What?
Tom hurt my mom.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Go up and make sure mom's okay.
go get
Apparently
Tom a
my 1-year-old daughter hurt my wife upstairs. So we were going to mark the 23-ish minute mark as a
Family
visit
time.
from family, whether it's the furry kind or the toddler kind.
Awesome.
Moving on to the last 4 teams that we have in
Okay.
the tournament. Who are your last 4 teams in the bracket?
Last 4 in, I got Mississippi State, Georgia, Syracuse, and Drake. I do not feel good at all about Georgia or Syracuse. They don't have great wins, but they have, pretty clean resumes, especially Syracuse. No losses outside of Quad 1, but man, Syracuse is like 85th in the predictive metrics. I don't think they'll stay there. I don't think, even though I have them in right now, I don't think the committee actually would decide to put them in, but they're if you're top 32 in the resume metrics, I have a very, very hard time leaving you out. So that's why I have Georgia and Syracuse in.
Yeah, I think your logic tracks pretty closely with where I'm at. Nevada, I have in the bracket 2-1 against Quadrant 1. For me, the big thing that gets them in is that neutral court win over TCU because TCU's looking a lot better.
Yep.
So I think that is kind of a trump card when you get towards that bubble area. Next, I have those Georgia Bulldogs in the bracket. They have a 27.5 resume metric average. And if Selection Sunday was today, I'm not overly impressed with anything Georgia's done, but they have a 27.5 resume metric average.
I mean, they could win last night against South Carolina.
On the road.
They almost beat Tennessee. That would have been. I had been tweeting about that before the game, that like nobody was talking about Georgia heading into that Tennessee game. I was like, man, it'd be funny if they won that, and then all of a sudden everybody's like, oh man, Georgia, they're an 8 seed now. I wasn't looking at them before, but I think they're a solid team. They're better than their predicted metrics, but right now those are weighing them down for sure.
And the team I have just above South Carolina, as in above being closer to the bubble and the cut line. Excuse me, I have Georgia one spot above South Carolina. I think
Okay.
South Carolina is in a worse position than Georgia, simply because they both have strong resume metrics, but Georgia won at South Carolina.
Sure.
30 resume metric average for South Carolina. And the final team I have in the bracket is one that's just basically there off their quality wins. Nebraska beat Purdue at home, Michigan State at home. But the one that actually catches my attention even more than those, as surprising as that is, considering Purdue was a victory, at Kansas State, they were dominant in a true road game. And when you get to that bubble,
Yeah.
you start comparing resumes. If one team has a true road victory over another bubble team, that can mean a lot. So I think between the combination of the elite win at home over Purdue and the very good win at Kansas State, I think that's enough for Nebraska to be in the field.
Yeah. I'm not anti-Nebraska. I have them just barely out, and I could easily put them in instead of Syracuse. Like I don't like Syracuse's resume. It's just their resume metrics that I like. My first 4 out are Boise State. Nebraska is my second team out, and then both of those teams have 3 quad 1 wins, which is what makes it hard for me to have them out. Nebraska doesn't have any quad 2 wins though. That's part of the reason I have them out. But their 3 best are really strong. And then Wake Forest and Miami after their losses. I don't remember who lost to who yesterday, but those were both. Miami lost to Florida State. Wake Forest lost to NC State, I think. So yeah, and they were among my last 4 heading into yesterday, so that just bumped them out in my opinion.
Turn back to Florida State in a second.
Yeah, right.
My first 4 out, Wake Forest, team you just mentioned, they're 5-5 against quadrants 1 and 2. Very good, but their best win is Florida at home, Boston College on the road. I'm not sure. Whatever it is, it's not
Miami.
very good to be a best win.
They beat Miami in overtime, right? But I think that was at home, so
At home,
whatever.
They beat Virginia Tech at home. They beat Virginia at home. They've got good wins.
Everybody has beaten Virginia at home. Virginia's the worst road team ever. What
Yeah,
the hell is wrong with them?
I guess that's almost kind of the question is, like, what have they done over a tournament team? They just haven't. So for me, I think that's where Wake Forest finds themselves just literally the first team out of the bracket. Then I go to Drake, the Bulldogs. Very impressive against quadrants 1 and 2. 4-0 against that group. But they also have 3 quadrant 3 losses. That weighs them down. And they have a Nevada win on a neutral court. Very good win. But that's the only one of those 4 quadrant 1/2 losses that I think is a very high end win. So I mean it's a little bit hollow for a 4-0 against quadrants 1 and 2.
What's funny is I think you had Drake as your last team in on Sunday, and they were like my second team out. Now we flip-flopped. They're my last team in.
And it's nothing that Drake did. It's more
Yeah.
so that I just think some other teams passed them into the bracket.
Sure.
Syracuse, I do have as one of these final teams out of the bracket. They have a 33 resume metric average, but that 1-5 record against quadrant 1.
Yeah.
The only reason I even have them in contention is because they were
resume
so
metrics.
dominant against Oregon.
Oh yeah.
That adds a little bit of meat to the resume for me, or the resume metric average. And then the next team I have, despite an injury that's really been affecting them recently, I still think Providence is in the discussion.
Yeah.
They have that win over Marquette. They have that win over Wisconsin. If they win some games, I think they'll stay in that contention. I wouldn't bet on it, but I do think Providence, as it stands, is still a contender for a tournament bid.
They're up 11 spots in the net since yesterday because they destroyed DePaul. That was a fun little Twitter controversy today.
Really quick before we go, who are your number 1 seeds?
Purdue, Kansas, Connecticut, and Arizona. Same as it was on Sunday. I do think there's more of a case now for Connecticut to be ahead of Kansas, even despite that head-to-head win for the Jayhawks in Lawrence. After Connecticut beat Creighton, I think their resume is considerably stronger, but I'm sticking with it. Kansas slightly ahead of UConn, and then I still have Arizona at 4 overall, and North Carolina right behind them.
We have the same top three in the same exact order. I have Houston fourth, and again, same wins that they've had, but they just added a big victory over Texas Tech. Not that Texas Tech at home is such a great victory, but I mean literally, that was a big victory. They destroyed them. So Houston passing the eye test once again.
That's what Houston does. They either win by 30 or they score like 55 in a loss. That's why they've been so frustrating for 5 years.
And with that, we leave you for the evening. Hope you have a great weekend of college hoops.